The huge chamber buzzed with voices from dozens of different worlds. Commander Jake Morrison sat in his chair and tried not to let his anger show on his face. The alien voices around him were all saying the same thing. Humans were weak. Humans were cowards. Humans could not be trusted in a real fight. The Altarian delegate stood up on his 6 legs. His blue skin glowed under the bright lights of the Galactic Council chamber. When he spoke, the translation device made his words sound cold and sharp. "The human forces have failed us again and again," the Altarian said. "They fight well at first, but when their soldiers start dying, they run away. They call it tactical retreat, but we know what it really is. It is fear." Jake felt his hands tighten into fists. Beside him, Captain Lisa Hayes shifted in her seat. He could see she was angry too. All the humans in the chamber were angry, but they had learned to keep quiet. No one listened when they tried to explain. The Vraxian ambassador made a clicking sound with his mouthparts. His hard shell reflected the light like black metal. During the battle at Kepler Station, the humans lost only 15% of their forces. Then they retreated. Our warriors would have fought until every last one was dead. More aliens nodded their heads or made sounds of agreement. The Thurians, who looked like giant insects, buzzed their approval. The Zenthari, beings made of pure energy, flickered brighter to show they agreed. Jake wanted to stand up and shout at them all. He wanted to tell them about the doctrine of strategic withdrawal. He wanted to explain that humans valued every single life. When they retreated, it was not because they were scared. It was because they knew that dead soldiers could not fight in the next battle. But he had tried to explain this before. 3 years ago, when humans first joined the Galactic Defense Coalition, he had given speech after speech about human military thinking. The aliens had listened politely, but Jake could see they did not believe him. To them, it sounded like fancy words to hide the truth. They thought humans were just making excuses for being cowards. The worst part was that humans were good soldiers. Jake had seen them fight. They were brave, smart, and skilled, but they also knew when to pull back. They knew when to save their forces for another day. The alien species did not understand this. They saw retreat as failure. They saw tactical thinking as weakness. "Look at the Battle of Rigel 7, another alien voice said. This one belonged to a Kalthani, a species that looked like walking trees. The humans held the line for 6 hours. Then, when the enemy brought in reinforcements, they fell back. They left the Thurian forces to fight alone. Jake remembered that battle. The humans had been outnumbered 10-1. Staying would have meant certain death for everyone. By retreating, they had saved not just human lives, but also many Thurian soldiers who would have died in a hopeless fight. Later, the humans had helped plan a counterattack that won the whole campaign. But the aliens only remembered the retreat. They only saw what looked like humans running away when things got tough. Admiral Helen Carter, the highest-ranking human in the coalition, sat in the front row of the human section. Her face showed no emotion, but Jake had worked with her long, enough to see the pain in her eyes. She had spent her whole career dreaming of the day when humans would take their place among the stars. She had imagined working side by side with alien allies, sharing knowledge and fighting common enemies. Instead, humanity had become the laughingstock of the galaxy. Other species made jokes about human courage. They used phrases like running, like a human when they wanted to insult someone. The proud human military, which had never lost a war on Earth, was now seen as unreliable and weak. The council speaker, a tall alien with skin like silver metal, raised one of his 4 arms for silence. The chamber grew quiet. "The evidence is clear," he said in a voice that echoed strangely. "Human forces cannot be trusted in critical combat situations. They abandon their positions when casualties mount. They retreat when other species would. Stand firm. This behavior puts all coalition forces at risk." Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He looked around at the other humans in the chamber. Captain Lisa Hayes looked like she was about to cry. Commander Tony Martinez was staring at the floor. Even the younger officers who had joined the coalition full of hope and excitement now looked defeated. Therefore, The council speaker continued. Human forces will no longer be assigned to frontline combat operations. They will be restricted to support roles only. Supply lines, medical assistance, and rear guard operations. The vote was quick. Every non-human species voted yes. The humans were not allowed to vote on matters concerning their own military deployment. It was unanimous. Jake felt the weight of 3 years of frustration crash down on him. All the battles they had won through smart thinking. All the lives they had saved through careful planning. All the times they had turned defeat into victory by knowing when to retreat and when to attack. None of it mattered. The other species saw only what they wanted to see. They saw humans pulling back from hopeless fights and called it cowardice. They saw humans saving lives and called it weakness. They saw tactical brilliance and called it fear. As the session ended, Jake watched the alien delegates file out of the chamber. Many of them were talking excitedly about the decision. Some were already making plans for how to use human support forces in their next campaigns. They seemed happy to have humans carry their supplies and tend their wounded, as long as the humans stayed away from the real fighting. Admiral Carter stood up slowly. She looked older than she had that morning. The dream she had carried for so long was dying in front of her eyes. "Admiral," Jake said as he walked over to her, "what do we do now?" Carter was quiet for a long moment. She looked around the empty chamber, with its high ceiling and walls covered in symbols from 100 different worlds. This was supposed to be the place where all species worked together as equals. Instead, it had become the place where humanity was declared second-class, citizens of the galaxy. "We do our jobs," she said finally. "We serve in whatever role they give us. We prove ourselves through our actions, not our words." "But for how long?" Lisa Hayes asked. She had joined them, along with several other human officers. "How long do we keep trying to prove ourselves to people who have already made up their minds?" Carter looked at the young captain. "As long as it takes. We didn't come to the stars to be popular. We came to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Even if that means being the supply clerks and medics of the galaxy." Jake understood what she was saying, but it still hurt. Humanity had so much to offer. Their tactical thinking was among the best in the galaxy. Their technology was innovative and effective. Their soldiers were brave and skilled. But none of that mattered if the other species refused to see it. As they walked out of the chamber, Jake wondered if there would ever come a time when humanity could prove its worth. He wondered if there would ever be a situation where the other species would see past their prejudices and recognize human courage for what it really was. He had no way of knowing that such a time was coming. He had no way of knowing that within a year, a threat would emerge that would test every species in the galaxy. A threat so terrible that it would strip away all pretense and show the true character of every civilization. When that time came, the galaxy would learn the difference between tactical wisdom and cowardice. They would learn it from the species they had labeled as weak and unreliable. They would learn it from the humans who had been pushed to the back of every battle, only to find themselves standing at the front when it mattered most. The alarm bells rang through Coalition headquarters like the sound of doom itself. Dr. Nathan Price ran down the long metal corridors, his hands shaking as he clutched the datapad that contained the most terrifying information he had ever seen. Behind him, other scientists and military officers were also running. Everyone looked scared. 6 months had passed since the Council had pushed humans into support roles. Nathan had spent those months studying deep space signals, tracking ships, and mapping unknown sectors. It was quiet work that the aliens thought was safe enough for humans to handle. Today, he wished he had never looked at those long-range sensors. The emergency session of the Coalition Command was already starting when Nathan burst through the doors. The huge chamber was filled with military leaders from every major species. The Vraxian generals sat in their heavy armor, looking like giant beetles made of black metal. The Altarian admirals floated in their anti-gravity chairs, their blue skin glowing with nervous energy. Even the Zenthari had sent representatives, their energy forms flickering like living lightning. Dr. Price, called General Alex Stone, one of the few humans with a high-ranking position in Coalition Command. "Show them what you found." Nathan walked to the center of the room with legs that felt like water. He activated the holographic display and suddenly the chamber was filled with images that made everyone go silent. Ships. Thousands and thousands of ships, but not like any ships anyone had seen before. "The Devourers have returned," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The reaction was immediate. The Vraxian generals made clicking sounds of distress. The Altarians began to glow brighter with fear. Several smaller species started talking all at once in their own languages. Even the proud Zenthari flickered rapidly, which Nathan knew was a sign of extreme agitation. "Are you certain?" asked Supreme Commander Zethkar, the Altarian leader of coalition forces. His voice came through the translator with a tremor that Nathan had never heard before. "We have confirmed it through 17 different sensor arrays," Nathan replied. "The fleet signature matches historical records perfectly. Biomechanical ships, energy absorption capabilities, and the distinctive spiral formation they use when approaching a system. On the holographic display, the images showed massive ships that looked more like living creatures than machines. They had organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Dark tentacles extended from their hulls, and their engines glowed with a sickly green light that hurt to look at. Captain Susan Blake, who commanded a human medical frigate, had heard stories about the Devourers since she was a child. Every species in the galaxy had legends about them. They were the nightmare that lived in the dark between stars, the thing that parents used to scare children into behaving. "How many?" asked General Korath, the Vraxian war leader whose reputation for fearlessness was known throughout the galaxy. Nathan swallowed hard before answering. "Our best estimate is between 8 and 12,000 ships, possibly more. They have consumed 17 systems in the Outer Rim territories in the past 4 months." The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. 12,000 ships was larger than the entire coalition fleet. It was larger than any military force that had ever existed in known space. "What does consumed mean exactly?" asked Commander Ryan Murphy, a human who had been quietly taking notes in the back of the room. Nathan activated another part of the display. This time it showed before and after images of star systems. The before images showed planets covered in green and blue with cities visible from space and orbital stations bustling with activity. The after images showed dead worlds, brown and gray, with no signs of life at all. "They strip everything," Nathan explained. "All biological matter. Plants, animals, bacteria, even the organic compounds in the soil. They leave behind dead rocks orbiting dead suns." The chamber fell completely silent. This was not like the wars they were used to fighting. There would be no negotiations, no surrender terms, no prisoners taken. The Devourers did not want territory, or resources or political control. They wanted to eat everything alive in the galaxy. "How long do we have?" Supreme Commander Zethkar asked. "Based on their current speed and the time they spend consuming each system, we estimate 18 months until they reach Earth, 14 months until they reach Altara Prime, 16 months until they reach the Vraxian home system." The reality of the situation began to sink in. This was not a problem that could be solved by assigning it to support species. This was not a battle that could be won by the warrior cultures alone. This was a threat to every living thing in the galaxy. General Stone noticed something that worried him even more than the Devourer fleet. As the meeting continued, and the full scope of the threat became clear, he could see some of the alien commanders already starting to look at each other with suspicion. The unity that had held the coalition together was beginning to crack under pressure. "What do we know about their combat capabilities?" asked Admiral Thys, a Thurian whose insect-like features made it hard to read her expressions. Nathan brought up another set of data. Historical records from their last appearance 200 years ago show that they adapt to any weapon used against them. Energy weapons become less effective after the first few engagements. Kinetic weapons show similar patterns. They seem to learn from each attack and develop countermeasures. "Then how were they stopped before?" General Korath demanded. "They were not stopped," Nathan said quietly. "They left. The historical records suggest they had simply consumed enough biological matter to satisfy whatever need drives them. They departed as suddenly as they had arrived. This news was even worse than the fleet size. It meant that military victory might not even be possible. The Devourers might be unstoppable by conventional means. Captain Tony Martinez, who had been monitoring communications during the meeting, approached General Stone with a grim expression. "Sir, we are already receiving reports of ships leaving their assigned positions. The Bricks have recalled their deep space patrols. The Nexar are requesting permission to redeploy closer to their home systems." Stone was not surprised, but he was disappointed. The meeting was not even over yet, and some species were already thinking about protecting only themselves. As the session continued, more disturbing information came to light. The Devourers had been moving through space in a pattern that suggested they were not randomly choosing targets. They seemed to be following the most populated space lanes, consuming the systems with the most biological diversity first. "They are not just hungry," Nathan explained. "They are intelligent. They are choosing their targets for maximum nutritional value." Dr. Sarah Kim, Nathan's assistant, had been studying the movement patterns on a separate display. She approached the center of the room with data that made the situation even worse. "The projected path puts them on a direct course for the core systems," she announced. "Earth, Altara Prime, Vrax, and Zenthar Prime are all in their direct path. They will not have to change course to consume our home worlds." The implication was clear. This was not just a random disaster. The Devourers were coming for the heart of Coalition space. They would consume the home worlds of every major species unless they were stopped. Supreme Commander Zethkar called for a recess so that each species could consult with their home governments. As the alien delegates filed out of the chamber, General Stone noticed that many of them were already making private communications. He had a sinking feeling that he knew what those conversations were about. "General," Captain Blake approached him as the chamber emptied. "What are our orders?" Stone looked at the holographic display, still showing the massive Devourer fleet, moving through space like a plague of locusts. "Continue monitoring their movements. Prepare detailed reports on their capabilities. And start thinking about what happens if some of our allies decide to protect only themselves." "You think they will abandon the Coalition?" Blake asked. Stone watched the last of the alien delegates leave the chamber. "I think we are about to find out what courage really means, and I think we might not like what we discover." As the humans began to pack up their equipment, none of them could have guessed that they were witnessing the beginning of the end of the Galactic Coalition as they knew it. The threat that was supposed to unite all species against a common enemy was instead about to reveal the true character of each civilization. And in that revelation, humanity would finally get the chance to show the galaxy what they were really made of. The first battle against the Devourers happened at Proxima Defense Line, 3 months after the emergency meeting. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Murphy watched from his medical frigate as the combined Coalition fleet prepared for battle. Over 5,000 ships from dozens of different species formed the largest military force in galactic history. Ryan had never seen anything so magnificent. Vraxian battle cruisers hung in space like black mountains covered in weapons. Altarian destroyers glowed blue with their energy shields. Thurian swarm fighters moved in perfect formations like schools of metal fish. Even the mysterious Zenthari had contributed ships made of pure energy that pulsed with rainbow colors. The human ships were there too, but mostly in support roles. Medical frigates like Ryan's, supply vessels, and communication ships. Admiral Carter had managed to get a few human warships included in the battle line, but they were placed in the rear guard positions. "All units, this is Supreme Commander Zethkar," came the transmission across all frequencies. "Today we show these creatures that the Coalition stands united. Today we prove that no force in the universe can break our resolve." Ryan felt hopeful as he watched the massive fleet move into position. Surely nothing could stand against such power. The Devourers might be numerous, but they faced the combined might of 50 civilized worlds. Then the enemy appeared. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made real. Their biomechanical ships writhed and pulsed as they moved. Some looked like giant jellyfish with tentacles trailing behind them. Others resembled enormous insects with wings that beat in the vacuum of space. All of them were wrong in ways that Her to look at. Contact! Screamed the sensor operator on a nearby Vraxian cruiser. 8,000 enemy ships, range decreasing rapidly. The battle began immediately. The Coalition fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams and plasma bolts lit up space like a deadly fireworks show. Missiles streaked across the darkness in streams of light. For a moment, it looked like the Coalition might win. The Devourer ships absorbed the energy weapons. The plasma bolts disappeared into their hulls like water soaking into sand. The missiles exploded against their shields, but the shields reformed almost instantly. Within minutes, it became clear that the historical records were correct. The Devourers adapted to every weapon used against them. Their hulls are changing, reported Dr. Kim from the human science vessel. The molecular structure is shifting to counter our attacks. What happened next was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Devourer ships moved through the Coalition fleet, like sharks through a school of fish. Their bioweapons were unlike anything anyone had seen before. Some fired streams of acid that ate through hull metal like it was paper. Others released swarms of mechanical parasites that burrowed into enemy ships and tore them apart from the inside. Ryan watched in horror as ship after ship was destroyed or consumed. The proud Vraxian battlecruiser Doombringer was wrapped in war tentacles and pulled into the mouth of a massive Devourer vessel. The Altarian flagship Azure Hope simply disappeared, absorbed so completely that it left no wreckage behind. All units fall back to secondary positions, Supreme Commander Zethkar ordered, but his voice was shaking now. The retreat became a rout. Ships fled in all directions, abandoning formation and leaving their allies behind. Ryan's own ship was saved only because a Zenthari energy vessel sacrificed itself to give the medical frigates time to escape. Of the 5,000 ships that had entered the battle, fewer than 2,000 made it out. The survivors limped back to Coalition space carrying news of the most devastating defeat in galactic history. But the worst was yet to come. 3 days after the battle, the Zenthari announced their withdrawal from the Coalition. Their energy being ambassador appeared before the emergency council session, flickering with what looked like fear. "We must preserve our essence," the Zenthari said. "This threat is beyond our ability to combat. We will relocate our people to distant regions where these creatures cannot find us." Captain Tony Martinez, monitoring the session from Coalition headquarters, felt his stomach sink. The Zenthari were one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. If they were running away, what hope did anyone else have? The Zenthari withdrawal was just the beginning. Within a week, the Kalthani Empire announced that they were moving their entire industrial base to systems beyond the galactic rim. The BRICS Collective recalled all their ships to defend only their home territory. The Nexar Federation simply stopped responding to Coalition communications. Ryan found himself filing report after report, documenting the systematic collapse of the Alliance. Every day brought news of another species abandoning their posts. The carefully planned defense lines were falling apart as entire fleets simply vanished. "The Wolf 359 defense station has gone dark," he reported to Admiral Carter during their daily briefing. The Nexar pulled out without even notifying their human support staff. 1,500 people were left stranded until we could send rescue ships. Admiral Carter looked older every day. The woman who had once dreamed of leading humanity to greatness among the stars now spent her time managing the collapse of everything she had worked to build. "What about the Kepler grid?" she asked. "Automated systems only. The BRICS technicians abandoned their posts yesterday. The defense platforms are still functional, but there is no one to operate them if the Devourers show up." The pattern was the same everywhere. Species that had called humans cowards were now fleeing faster than anyone had thought possible. They were not making tactical retreats to preserve forces for future battles. They were simply running away and leaving everyone else to face the threat alone. The irony was not lost on any of the human commanders. For 3 years they had been told that they were unreliable in combat. They had been called cowards for making strategic withdrawals when casualties mounted. Now the same species that had mocked them were abandoning the fight entirely at the first sign of real danger. Captain Susan Blake was stationed at a supply depot that served 3 different defense sectors. She watched as alien ships stopped coming for supplies and ammunition. Instead, they were loading up with fuel and food for long journeys to distant stars. "Where are they all going?" asked her supply officer, Lieutenant Danny Reed. "As far away as they can get," Susan replied. "The Thurians are evacuating to the Magellanic Clouds. The Altarians are setting up bunker colonies in dead systems where there is no biological matter to attract the Devourers. Even the mighty Vraxians, whose warrior culture had made them the backbone of coalition military forces, were pulling back. General Korath, who had once boasted that his people would fight to the last warrior, issued orders for all Vraxian ships to return home immediately. "The Vraxian sphere is now closed to all non-Vraxian vessels," came the official announcement. "We must protect our people and our heritage." Commander Pete Rogers, stationed at the Luna defense platform above Earth, summarized the situation in his personal log. "They called us cowards for 3 years. They said we could not be trusted when things got tough. Now when things are actually tough, they are all running away and leaving us to clean up the mess." The speed of the collapse was breathtaking. Within 2 months of the Proxima battle, the Galactic Coalition had effectively ceased to exist. Some species had withdrawn completely. Others had formed small alliances to protect only their own territory. A few had simply disappeared, their entire civilizations fleeing to unknown regions of space. The humans found themselves in an impossible situation. They had been pushed to the margins of the coalition, given only support roles and treated as second-class members. Now they were among the few species still willing to fight. Admiral Carter called a meeting of all remaining human commanders. The conference room that had once hosted representatives from 50 different worlds now contained only humans and a handful of aliens whose own species had abandoned them. "The coalition is finished," Carter announced without ceremony. "Most of our allies have fled. Those who remain are focused only on defending their own worlds. We are effectively on our own." The room was quiet as everyone absorbed this information. 3 years of being called cowards, and now they were the ones being asked to stand up when everyone else had given up. "What are our orders, Admiral?" asked Commander Jake Morrison. Carter was quiet for a long moment. Outside the windows of the space station, Earth hung in the darkness like a blue jewel. It was the world that had given birth to humanity, the world that had sent them to the stars with dreams of joining a galactic community. "We defend what matters to us," she said finally. "We make our stand where we choose to make it. And we show the galaxy what it really means to have courage when courage is the only thing left." As the meeting ended, none of the human officers spoke about the odds they faced. None of them mentioned that they were now outnumbered not just by the Devourers but by the scale of space itself. They had been abandoned by their allies and left to face an enemy that had already proven it could destroy the greatest military force in galactic history. But they did not run. They did not evacuate to distant stars or hide in empty systems. They began to plan their defense, knowing that they might be the last ones standing when everything else had fallen apart. President Laura Kennedy stood before the cameras in the White House, knowing that her words would be broadcast to every human settlement in the galaxy. Behind her, through the windows, she could see the lights of Washington glowing in the evening. Darkness. Soon those lights might be gone forever. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. "We face the greatest threat our species has ever known. The Devourers are coming, and most of our allies have chosen to flee rather than fight. Today, I am here to tell you that we will not run." Across human space, people stopped what they were doing to listen. On Mars, colonists gathered around communication screens in their domed cities. On the mining stations of the asteroid belt, workers floated in zero gravity as they watched their president speak. On distant worlds at the edge of human territory, farmers and scientists and soldiers all heard the same message. "We will not abandon Earth," Kennedy continued. "We will not abandon our colonies. We will not abandon the few allies who have chosen to stay and fight with us. This is our line in the sand. This is where we make our stand." The decision had not been easy. Kennedy's advisors had spent weeks showing her plans for evacuation. They could move the human population to distant galaxies, far beyond the reach of the Devourers. Humanity could survive even if Earth did not. But Kennedy knew that some things were worth more than survival. Sometimes there were principles that mattered more than safety. Sometimes there were fights that had to be fought, even when winning seemed impossible. Colonel Danny Reed watched the president's speech from his office aboard the space station that served as Coalition Command. Most of the alien delegations had already left, taking their ships and their staff with them. The station felt empty now, like a ghost town in space. Sir, his aide, Lieutenant Kelly Wright, entered the office with a data pad. We have confirmation from Admiral Carter. All remaining coalition forces are being placed under human command. Danny looked at the numbers on the pad and felt his heart sink. The great coalition fleet that had once numbered in the thousands was now reduced to fewer than 400 ships. Most of them were human vessels that had been serving in support roles. There were also a few dozen alien ships whose crews had refused to abandon the fight when their governments ordered them home. What about supplies? Danny asked. The good news is that we have plenty of everything, Kelly replied. The fleeing species left behind most of their equipment and ammunition. The bad news is that we do not have enough people to use it all. It was a strange situation. Humanity now had access to the most advanced weapons and technology in the galaxy, but they lacked the numbers to make effective use of it. They were like children trying to wear adult clothing that was far too big for them. Admiral Helen Carter arrived at the station 3 days later, along with the other senior human commanders. The meeting they held in the main conference room was unlike any military planning session in history. They were not planning how to win a war. They were planning how to make their defeat as costly as possible for the enemy. The Devourers will reach the outer colonies in 8 weeks, reported Commander Pete Rogers, who had been tracking their movement. They will be at Mars in 12 weeks, Earth in 14 weeks. The timeline was terrifyingly short. In less than 4 months, the most important human world would face an enemy that had already proven it could destroy any conventional military force. What about the defense platforms? Asked Captain Chris Palmer, who commanded the orbital defenses around Earth. Fully operational, replied Commander Angela Torres, the chief engineer for the Sol system defenses. We have energy shields, plasma cannons, and missile batteries. But based on what happened at Proxima, they will adapt to our weapons within hours. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the hopelessness of their situation. They had weapons, but the enemy would learn to counter them. They had ships, but not nearly enough. They had courage, but courage alone might not be sufficient. There is one thing we have that the Devourers have never faced before, said Admiral Carter quietly. Everyone looked at her, waiting for an explanation. Every species they have fought so far has used the same basic military doctrine. Mass formations, overwhelming firepower, traditional battle tactics. The Devourers have learned to counter all of these approaches. What are you suggesting? Asked Danny. We fight the way humans have always fought when we were outnumbered and outgunned. We be unpredictable. We use every dirty trick we know. We make them adapt to so many different threats that they cannot keep up. It was not a plan for victory. It was a plan for making the enemy pay the highest possible price for their conquest. But it was something, and something was better than nothing. Over the next several weeks, the human forces began preparations unlike anything they had ever attempted. Instead of forming traditional battle lines, they scattered their ships throughout the Sol system. Small groups hid in the asteroid belt, ready to strike and disappear. Others positioned themselves near Jupiter, planning to use the giant planet's gravity to slingshot weapons at incredible speeds. Captain Susan Blake found herself commanding a mixed group of ships near Saturn. Her force included 2 human destroyers, a Vraxian heavy cruiser whose crew had refused to return home, and 3 Altarian fighters whose pilots had been stranded when their home fleet departed. It feels wrong, admitted Commander Kextar, the Vraxian captain. We should face our enemies in open battle, not hide like pirates in the dark. Your way of fighting got 5,000 ships destroyed at Proxima, Susan replied bluntly. Maybe it is time to try something different. The preparations revealed something interesting about the species that had chosen to stay. Most of them were individuals who had been considered troublemakers or outcast by their own governments. Vraxian warriors who questioned orders. Altarian pilots who flew too aggressively. Xanthari who refused to abandon their physical forms. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Murphy, now serving as a tactical advisor, noticed the pattern during one of his reports to Admiral Carter. The aliens who stayed are not following their species. Normal behavior patterns, he observed. They are the rebels, the misfits, the ones who think differently. Maybe that is exactly what we need, Carter replied. Maybe conventional thinking is what got everyone else destroyed. As the Devourers moved closer to human space, more disturbing news arrived. The outer colonies had begun sending distress signals before going silent. Kepler Station, with its population of 2 million, transmitted for 3 hours as the biomechanical ships consumed everything in the system. Then the signal stopped. The pattern was always the same. The Devourers would surround a system and begin the process of consumption. Nothing escaped. Nothing survived. Within days, thriving worlds became dead rocks orbiting cold suns. They will be here in 2 weeks, reported Lieutenant Kelly Wright during the final planning session. Admiral Carter looked around the table at the faces of the people who would lead humanity's last stand. They were not the greatest military minds in the galaxy. They were not commanding the most powerful fleet in space. But they were here, and they were ready to fight. I want everyone to understand something, Carter said. We are not fighting this battle to win. We are fighting it because some things are worth fighting for, even when you know you are going to lose. We are fighting it because someone needs to show the galaxy that there is a difference between tactical retreat and abandonment. She paused, looking out the window at the blue planet that hung in the darkness below them. We are fighting this battle because we are human, and humans do not give up when giving up is the easy thing to do. As the meeting ended, the commanders returned to their ships and their positions throughout the Sol system. They knew that in 2 weeks they would face an enemy that had never been defeated. They knew that they were outnumbered by thousands to 1. They knew that their weapons would become useless within hours of the first engagement. But they also knew that they would not run. They would not evacuate to distant stars. They would not abandon their home when their home needed defenders. They would stand and fight, because that was what humans did when everything else had given up hope. The Devourers arrived at the edge of the Sol system like a plague of darkness against the stars. Captain Chris Palmer watched from his command post on Defense Platform 7 as the biomechanical ships emerged from hyperspace. There were so many of them that they blocked out entire sections of Starfield. Contact, reported his sensor operator, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. 11,000 enemy ships, range 4 billion kilometers and closing. Chris felt his mouth go dry. Even after all the reports and briefings, seeing the actual size of the Devourer fleet was overwhelming. Each of their ships was the size of a human city, writhing and pulsing with organic movement that made them look more like living creatures than machines. All units, this is Admiral Carter, came the transmission across all human frequencies. Today we show them what it means to fight for something that matters. Today we show the galaxy what humans are really made of. The Battle of Sol began not with a massive fleet engagement, but with something the Devourers had never experienced before. Small groups of human ships struck from every direction at once, using tactics that seemed to make no sense. Commander Angela Torres, piloting a fighter near Mercury, dove straight into the Devourer formation with her engines overloaded. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships, she targeted their sensor arrays with precision strikes before vanishing into the sun's corona, where the Devourers could not follow. Near Jupiter, Captain Pete Rogers led a squadron of destroyers in a gravity slingshot maneuver that accelerated chunks of asteroid metal to incredible speeds. The improvised weapons punched through Devourer hulls before the biomechanical ships could adapt to them. The enemy had never faced anything like this. Every previous battle had followed predictable patterns. Fleets formed up, exchanged fire, and one side won or lost. But the humans refused to fight a conventional battle. They struck from unexpected angles, used weapons the Devourers had never seen, and disappeared before the enemy could respond. Their adaptation rate is slowing, reported Dr. Nathan Price from his science vessel hidden in the asteroid belt. They are trying to counter 17 different types of attacks simultaneously. Their biomechanical systems cannot keep up. For 6 hours, the human tactics worked. The Devourers lost dozens of ships to weapons and strategies they could not predict or counter. But they were learning, and they had thousands of ships to spare. Captain Susan Blake watched from her position near Saturn as the tide of battle began to turn. The Devourers started ignoring the small human strike groups and focused on reaching Earth itself. Their biomechanical hulls began to glow as they adapted to every weapon the humans used. Platform 7 is taking heavy fire, came the desperate transmission from Chris Palmer. Shields down to 30%. We need support. But there was no support to send. Every human ship was already engaged, fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. The careful plans and clever tactics were starting to break down under the sheer weight of numbers. Chris watched his shield readings drop to 0 just as a massive devourer ship, shaped like a jellyfish made of metal and flesh, wrapped its tentacles around his defense platform. Emergency alarms screamed through the corridors as the biomechanical creature began to tear the station apart. All hands, abandon platform, Chris ordered. But even as his crew ran for the escape pods, he stayed at his post, manually targeting the station's remaining weapons at the creature that was destroying his command. Platform 7 is gone, reported someone on the communication network. Platform 12 is venting atmosphere. The orbital defenses around Earth were falling one by one. The Devourers had adapted to the human weapons and were now tearing through the defense grid like it was made of paper. Soon they would reach Earth itself. It was then that something remarkable happened. Instead of trying to retreat or escape, the human defenders began to make choices that shocked even their allies. Commander Angela Torres, her fighter damaged and life support failing, made a decision that would be remembered for 1,000 years. Instead of trying to reach safety, she aimed her crippled ship directly at the largest devourer vessel she could find. For everyone who could not stay to fight, she transmitted, as her fighter accelerated toward the biomechanical monster. Her ship was tiny compared to the devourer vessel, but she hit it at a significant fraction of light speed. The explosion tore a hole through the creature's hull and triggered a chain reaction that destroyed 2 other enemy ships. Angela's sacrifice was not unique. Across the solar system, human crews were making similar decisions. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were destroyed, they continued fighting with whatever they had left. Major Kenny Hayes, defending the lunar colonies with a force of just 12 ships, transmitted the words that would define the entire battle. You called us cowards because we saved lives when we could, but you ran when lives needed to be given. Today you learned the difference. The Devourers had never encountered anything like this. Every other species they had fought became less effective as their situation grew more desperate. But the humans seemed to get stronger as things got worse. They fought harder when they were losing. They took greater risks when safety was impossible. Captain Ryan Murphy, his medical frigate converted into a weapons platform, rammed his ship into a devourer vessel that was heading for Earth's atmosphere. His last transmission was simple. Tell my family I did my job. The pattern repeated itself throughout the solar system. Human crews, faced with certain death, chose how they would die. They chose to make their deaths count for something. They chose to extract the highest possible price from an enemy that had never been forced to pay such a cost. The turning point came during the 97th hour of the battle. The Devourers, having suffered losses they had never experienced before, began to exhibit behavior that confused their own biomechanical systems. They started avoiding certain types of targets. They began to hesitate before engaging damaged human ships. Dr. Nathan Price, still hidden in the asteroid belt, made an observation that changed everything. They are showing signs of fear? That should be impossible. The Devourers do not experience emotions as we understand them. But fear or not, something was affecting the Devourer fleet. Their attacks became less coordinated. Their adaptation rate slowed even further. For the first time in their recorded history, they began to withdraw from a battle they were winning. Admiral Helen Carter, commanding from the moon's surface as Earth burned in the sky above, could hardly believe the report she was receiving. Confirm that, she ordered. Are they actually retreating? Confirmed, came the reply from multiple sources. The Devourer fleet is pulling back from Earth orbit. They are leaving the system. The silence that followed was filled with disbelief. No one had expected to win. No one had even hoped to survive. They had simply fought because fighting was the right thing to do. As news of the Battle of Sol spread across the galaxy, something unprecedented happened. The species that had fled began to return, but they did not return as conquering heroes or saviors. They returned as students asking to learn from the species they had once dismissed. The Varaxians, whose warrior culture had made them the backbone of coalition military forces, sent a delegation to Earth with a simple message. Teach us what courage really means. The Altarians, who had fled to bunker worlds at the first sign of danger, requested permission to study human military doctrine. The Zenthari, beings of pure energy who had considered themselves above physical concerns, wanted to understand how humans found strength in their mortality. Admiral Carter, now the most respected military commander in known space, addressed the reformed coalition with words that would be carved into monuments on 100 worlds. We were never cowards. We were careful with lives because we understood their value. But when the time came to spend those lives for something greater, we spent them without hesitation. That is not cowardice or bravery. That is humanity. The humans who survived the Battle of Sol never called themselves heroes. They simply returned to their duties, their work, their lives. But across the galaxy, they were known by a title that no species had ever earned before. The ones who stood when standing meant everything. The Devourers never returned to Coalition space. Whether they were truly afraid or simply decided to seek easier prey elsewhere, no one could say. But their retreat sent a message across the galaxy that would be remembered for millennia. There was a difference between tactical withdrawal and abandonment. There was a difference between preserving life and preserving only yourself. And humanity had taught the galaxy that lesson in the most powerful way possible, by standing firm when everyone else had given up hope.